I was standing in my sister's beautifully decorated living room, surrounded by pink balloons and gift boxes, when my mother looked me straight in the eye and said the words that would change everything between us forever. "Wayne, you need to understand something," she announced loud enough for everyone at Jessica's baby shower to hear. "Your sister's family will always be the priority in this household, and you'll always be second." My father nodded approvingly from across the room, his arms crossed as he backed up her statement without hesitation. The silence that followed was deafening. My girlfriend Sarah squeezed my hand tighter as I felt my world crumble around me. Growing up in the suburbs of Denver, I always knew Jessica was special in our parents' eyes, but I never realized just how deep that favoritism ran until I was 28 years old and finally started paying attention to the numbers. My sister, 3 years younger than me, had always been the golden child who could do no wrong. While I spent my teenage summers working at the local grocery store to save money for my first car, Jessica received a brand new Honda Civic for her 16th birthday, complete with a red bow on top, and our parents beaming with pride in the driveway. When college applications came around, I filled out endless scholarship forms and took on student loans to pay for my accounting degree at Colorado State University. Meanwhile, Jessica's tuition at the University of Colorado Boulder was paid in full by our parents, along with her sorority fees, spring break trips, and a monthly allowance that covered her shopping expenses. I remember eating ramen noodles in my dorm room while she posted Instagram photos of expensive dinners with her friends. After graduation, I worked tirelessly to establish my career as a certified public accountant, renting small apartments and driving my aging Toyota Corolla while saving every penny I could. Jessica, on the other hand, married her college boyfriend Brad right after graduation and received a down payment for a 4-bedroom house in one of Denver's most desirable neighborhoods as a wedding gift from our parents. The house came complete with a 3-car garage, a swimming pool, and a mortgage that our parents quietly helped cover during Brad's periods of unemployment. But the real shock came during a routine visit to my parents' house last March. I had stopped by to pick up some tax documents when I accidentally knocked over a stack of papers on my father's desk. As I bent down to collect them, I caught sight of bank statements that made my blood run cold. There, in black and white, was a record of financial transfers that painted a picture I had never fully comprehended. Over the past 5 years alone, my parents had given Jessica and Brad over $200,000 in what they called family gifts. Private school tuition for their 3 children totaled $60,000. Luxury family vacations to Hawaii, Europe, and Disney World added up to another $40,000. The down payment assistance for an investment property they were renting out came to $50,000. Monthly supplements to cover their lifestyle expenses during Brad's career transitions totaled $30,000. Emergency funds for home repairs, medical bills, and credit card payments accounted for the remaining $20,000. Meanwhile, just 6 months earlier, I had asked my parents for help with the $3,000 fee for my certified public accountant licensing exam and continuing education requirements. They had looked at me with disappointment and explained that money was tight, suggesting I should be more financially responsible and independent at my age. They recommended I take out a small loan or put the expenses on a credit card, reminding me that I had a good job and should be able to handle such costs on my own. The contrast was staggering and painful. While I had been struggling to build my career and save money for my future, my parents had been quietly funding Jessica's entire lifestyle without any expectation of repayment or even acknowledgement of their sacrifices. Every family gathering where they praised my independence and responsibility now took on a different meaning. They had been proud of me for handling my own expenses, not because they respected my maturity, but because it freed up their resources to continue supporting Jessica's dependence on them. The breaking point came during a family dinner at Jessica's house 2 weeks after my discovery. She had just announced her 4th pregnancy, and our parents immediately began discussing plans for converting their guest room into a nursery for when she needed help with childcare. They talked about upgrading her minivan to a larger SUV to accommodate the growing family, and our mother mentioned looking into hiring a cleaning service to help Jessica manage the household during her pregnancy. I sat quietly at the dinner table, watching this conversation unfold while my 3 young nieces and nephews played around us blissfully, unaware of the financial empire that supported their comfortable lifestyle. Jessica glowed with excitement as she described her plans for the baby's room, complete with custom furniture and a designer mobile that cost more than my monthly rent. Brad smiled and nodded occasionally, contributing ideas about family vacation destinations they could explore once the new baby was old enough to travel. When I finally found my voice, I asked a simple question that cut through the cheerful conversation like a knife through butter. How exactly are you planning to afford all of this? The table went silent. Jessica looked confused, as if the concept of budgeting or financial planning had never occurred to her. Brad shifted uncomfortably in his chair, avoiding eye contact with everyone. Our parents exchanged a meaningful glance before our father cleared his throat and explained that family members help each other during important life transitions. That night, driving home with Sarah, I finally understood the full scope of what I was dealing with. This was not just favoritism or different parenting styles. This was a systematic financial arrangement that had been operating behind the scenes for years, creating 2 completely different standards of family membership. Jessica lived in a world where money appeared whenever she needed it, where her desires became family priorities, and where her children's future was secured by grandparents who saw them as their primary legacy. I lived in a world where asking for help was seen as weakness, where independence was mandatory, and where my own future family would receive no such consideration or support. 3 months after my shocking discovery, Jessica decided to throw an elaborate gender reveal party at Riverside Park, complete with professional photographers, a catering service, and decorations that probably cost more than most people's monthly salary. The entire extended family was invited, including aunts, uncles, cousins, and family friends who had watched Jessica and me grow up together. It was supposed to be a joyful celebration of new life, but I had planned to use this gathering for an announcement of my own. Sarah and I had gotten engaged 2 weeks earlier during a quiet weekend getaway to Estes Park. I had saved for months to buy her a beautiful diamond ring, and she had said yes while we watched the sunset over the Rocky Mountains. We had kept our engagement private, wanting to share the news with both our families in person at the next family gathering. I thought Jessica's party would be the perfect opportunity to celebrate 2 pieces of wonderful family news together. The party was everything Jessica loved, the center of attention, beautifully orchestrated and completely funded by our parents, who had spared no expense to make their daughter's day special. Pink and blue streamers hung from every tree, a professional photographer captured every moment, and a dessert table showcased an elaborate cake designed to reveal the baby's gender when cut. Extended family members mingled on the manicured lawn, everyone dressed in their finest casual attire and carrying gifts for the expecting couple. As the afternoon progressed and the moment approached for the big reveal, I pulled my mother aside and mentioned that Sarah and I had some exciting news to share with the family as well. I explained that we had just gotten engaged and thought it would be wonderful to celebrate both occasions together, making it an even more memorable day for everyone involved. My mother's reaction was immediate and sharp. "Wayne, this is Jessica's day," she said firmly, glancing around to make sure no one else could hear our conversation. "It would be completely inappropriate to take attention away from her announcement. You need to wait for a more suitable time." I tried to explain that I was not trying to overshadow Jessica's moment, but rather add to the family's joy with another piece of happy news. My mother was unmoved, suggesting that combining announcements would diminish the significance of Jessica's pregnancy reveal. But the real shock came when I approached my father to discuss the situation, hoping he might be more understanding about sharing family celebration time. Instead, he delivered a blow that left me speechless. "Son, you need to understand something about family priorities." He began using the same tone he had used to explain important life lessons when I was a child. Jessica's pregnancy represents the continuation of our family legacy through grandchildren, who will carry on our name and traditions. Your relationship with Sarah, while we certainly wish you both well, is still relatively new and unproven. He continued explaining that family resources, both emotional and financial, needed to be focused on Jessica's growing family because her children were the future of our bloodline. My potential marriage to Sarah was something that might or might not last, but Jessica's children were permanent family members who deserved priority consideration in all family planning and resource allocation. He suggested that when Sarah and I had been together longer and proven the stability of our relationship, perhaps through marriage and children of our own, then we could expect more family investment and attention. The conversation left me reeling with disbelief. Not only were my parents treating my engagement as secondary news, but they were essentially telling me that my relationship was not worthy of family recognition or support until it proved itself according to their timeline and standards. Meanwhile, Jessica's fourth pregnancy was being celebrated as a major family achievement worthy of professional photographers and catered celebrations. During the actual gender reveal ceremony, Jessica and Brad cut into the elaborate cake to reveal pink frosting, announcing they were expecting another daughter. The crowd cheered, cameras flashed, and our parents beamed with pride as they hugged their golden daughter and promised their continued support through this pregnancy and beyond. I watched from the edge of the celebration, feeling like an outsider at my own family gathering. Later that evening, as family members lingered around the dessert table and children ran around the playground equipment, I overheard a conversation that completely shattered my remaining illusions about my place in the family hierarchy. My mother was speaking with my Aunt Linda, Jessica's godmother, about future family planning and financial considerations. "We are so blessed that Jessica keeps giving us beautiful grandchildren," my mother said, her voice filled with genuine happiness. "Robert and I have been setting aside money for each child's education fund, and we are already looking at properties in better school districts in case they need to move closer to top-rated schools." She continued explaining how they were researching the best private schools in Colorado and considering establishing trust funds to ensure their grandchildren had every possible advantage in life. My Aunt Linda asked about my plans for marriage and children, wondering if I might follow Jessica's example of early family building. My mother's response cut through me like a blade. "Wayne has always been more focused on his career than on family responsibilities," she explained dismissively. "He is still figuring out what he wants from life, and frankly, he has always been somewhat selfish with his expectations. Jessica understands that family comes first, but Wayne seems to think the world revolves around his personal desires and achievements." Standing just a few feet away, hidden by the trunk of a large oak tree, I heard my own mother describe me as selfish and self-centered to my aunt, while simultaneously planning elaborate financial futures for Jessica's children. The irony was overwhelming. Jessica, who had never held a job longer than 6 months, who had never paid her own rent, and who expected our parents to fund her lifestyle indefinitely, was being praised for understanding family priorities. Meanwhile, I was being criticized as selfish for building a career, saving money, and planning a future that did not depend on constant parental bailouts. That night, driving home with Sarah after the party, I made a decision that would change my relationship with my family forever. I had spent 28 years trying to earn the love and respect that Jessica received automatically. I had worked hard, been responsible with money, and asked for help only when absolutely necessary, believing that my independence and success would eventually be valued and celebrated by my parents. Instead, I had learned that my independence was taken for granted, while Jessica's dependence was rewarded and encouraged. Sarah listened quietly as I explained everything I had discovered about the family financial arrangements and the conversation I had overheard about my character. She had always been supportive of my family relationships, even when she noticed the obvious favoritism, but she could see that something fundamental had shifted in my understanding of where I stood with my parents. We talked for hours about what this meant for our future together, and what kind of relationship we wanted to have with my family going forward. By the time we reached her apartment, I had made up my mind about what needed to happen next. Jessica's 32nd birthday celebration at the Capitol Grill downtown was supposed to be an intimate family dinner, but our parents had reserved the private dining room and invited 25 people to celebrate their daughter's special day. The restaurant's elegant atmosphere with its dark wood paneling and crystal chandeliers provided the perfect backdrop for what our parents considered a milestone worthy of significant investment. The multi-course meal they had arranged cost more than most people spend on groceries in 3 months, but money was never an object when it came to Jessica's happiness. I arrived at the restaurant with Sarah, both of us dressed appropriately for the upscale venue, carrying a thoughtful gift we had selected together for Jessica's birthday. The private dining room was already filled with extended family members, family friends, and Jessica's closest companions from college and her neighborhood social circle. Everyone was in a festive mood, celebrating another year of Jessica's life, and enjoying the generous hospitality our parents were providing for the occasion. As we took our seats at the beautifully appointed table, complete with fresh flowers and personalized menu cards, I reflected on all the birthday celebrations our parents had hosted over the years. Jessica's birthdays had always been elaborate affairs, with professional decorations, expensive gifts, and guest lists that included everyone she wanted to invite. My birthdays, in contrast, were typically acknowledged with a family dinner at a casual restaurant, and a modest gift that reflected practical considerations rather than celebration. The contrast had never bothered me much when I was younger, but now, armed with my newfound understanding of the family financial dynamics and my parents' true feelings about my place in their lives, every detail of the evening took on new significance. The cost of this single birthday dinner was probably equivalent to what they had refused to help me with for my professional licensing fees. Yet they were spending it without hesitation to make Jessica feel special and loved. During the appetizer course, as conversation flowed around the table, and everyone shared memories of Jessica's accomplishments over the past year, I made my decision about when and how to address the situation that had been building inside me for months. I had originally planned to wait until after the birthday celebration to have a private conversation with my parents about their treatment of their children. But something about the extravagance of the evening and the casual way they were spending money on Jessica while claiming poverty when it came to supporting me made waiting seem impossible. As the main course was being served, I stood up from my chair and gently tapped my wine glass with my fork to get everyone's attention. The conversation gradually died down as family members turned to look at me, expecting perhaps a toast to Jessica or a humorous birthday story from our childhood. Instead, I took a deep breath and began speaking in a calm, clear voice that carried throughout the private dining room. I want to thank everyone for being here tonight to celebrate Jessica's birthday. I began looking around the table at faces that had been part of my life since childhood. Family gatherings like this are important, and I appreciate the effort everyone has made to be here. I paused, letting the pleasant opening set the tone before shifting to the real purpose of my speech. However, I also want to take this opportunity to make an announcement about some changes I will be making in my relationship with this family going forward." The room fell completely silent. Jessica looked confused. Our parents appeared concerned, and Sarah reached over to squeeze my hand supportively under the table. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out a folder containing documents I had prepared specifically for this moment. Over the past several months, I have discovered some information about family financial arrangements that has helped me understand exactly where I stand in the family hierarchy. I opened the folder and began reading specific numbers that painted a clear picture of the disparity in treatment Jessica and I had received over the years. In the past 5 years, Jessica and Brad have received over $200,000 in direct financial support from our parents. I announced, watching as jaws dropped around the table and Jessica's face turned pale. "This includes $60,000 for private school tuition, $40,000 for luxury vacations, $50,000 for investment property down payments, and $50,000 in various other subsidies and emergency funds." I continued reading from my carefully prepared documentation, explaining how these financial gifts had been provided without any expectation of repayment or even acknowledgement, while my own requests for minimal assistance had been denied with lectures about financial responsibility and independence. The room remained silent except for the sound of my voice detailing the systematic preferential treatment that had shaped both Jessica's and my adult lives in completely different ways. 6 months ago. I continued, "I was told that the family could not afford to help me with $3,000 in professional licensing fees because money was tight and I needed to be more financially responsible." I looked directly at our parents as I spoke. "Yet during that same period you were providing Jessica with monthly supplements to cover her lifestyle expenses and planning to purchase her family a vacation home in Aspen." The silence that followed was deafening. Extended family members shifted uncomfortably in their chairs, uncertain about whether they should be witnessing this family confrontation. Jessica's eyes filled with tears as she began to understand the implications of what I was revealing. Our parents sat frozen, unable to deny the accuracy of my statements, but clearly unprepared for this level of public accountability. Effective immediately, I continued, "I am withdrawing from all family financial entanglements and emotional obligations that have been based on the assumption that I will always be available to provide support while receiving none in return." I reached into the folder again and pulled out additional documents that represented the practical implementation of my decision. Sarah and I became engaged 3 weeks ago. I announced producing the ring that she had been wearing on a chain around her neck rather than her finger. We will be planning our wedding independently without family involvement input or financial contribution. We have already begun the process and do not require or desire assistance from family members who have made it clear that our relationship is not worthy of the same investment they provide to Jessica's family. The shock in the room was palpable. Several relatives gasped audibly, and I could see our mother's face crumpling as she began to understand the full scope of what I was saying. But I was not finished with my announcement. I have also accepted a job transfer to Austin, Texas, effective in 2 months. I revealed, watching as this news hit our parents like a physical blow. I will be relocating permanently and will no longer be available for family events, emergency assistance, or crisis management. I have changed my emergency contact information, removed myself from family insurance policies and medical decision-making documents, and withdrawn from any inheritance expectations or family trust arrangements. Jessica finally found her voice and began crying openly, asking why I was doing this to the family and what had happened to cause such drastic changes. Several relatives tried to intervene, suggesting that family disputes should be handled privately rather than in public settings. Our father's face had turned red with anger, and our mother appeared to be in shock, unable to process what she was hearing. I closed the folder and returned it to my jacket pocket before delivering my final statement. This is not a decision made in anger or as an attempt to hurt anyone. I explained calmly. This is simply me accepting the reality that has been made clear to me about my position in this family and adjusting my expectations and behavior accordingly. If I will always be second priority, then I will start putting myself first. With that, I placed my napkin on the table, helped Sarah to her feet, and walked out of the private dining room, leaving behind a family gathering that had turned into chaos and a birthday celebration that would be remembered for all the wrong reasons. As we waited for our car in the restaurant's elegant lobby, we could hear raised voices coming from the private dining room as the family tried to process what had just happened. The conversation during our drive home was quiet but decisive. Sarah and I both understood that there would be no going back from what had happened that evening. I had burned bridges that could never be rebuilt in the same way, but I had also freed myself from a family dynamic that had been slowly destroying my self-worth and future happiness. For the first time in my adult life, I was truly putting myself first, and despite the pain of the evening, it felt like the right choice for our future together. 6 months after that explosive birthday dinner, Sarah and I were building a life in Austin that exceeded all our expectations for happiness and success. The job transfer had brought me to a prestigious accounting firm that specialized in corporate tax planning, where my skills were immediately recognized and rewarded with increased responsibility and compensation. Sarah had found work with a nonprofit organization that focused on financial literacy education, allowing her to use her background in social work while learning about business operations that complemented my expertise perfectly. We had purchased a charming 3-bedroom craftsman-style house in the Zilker neighborhood, complete with original hardwood floors, a renovated kitchen, and a backyard perfect for entertaining friends and colleagues. The house represented everything we wanted in a home character comfort and the potential for growth as our own family expanded in the future. For the first time in my adult life, I was making financial decisions based entirely on what Sarah and I wanted for our future without considering family obligations or expectations. Our engagement had blossomed into wedding planning that reflected our personalities and values, rather than family traditions or financial constraints imposed by others. We were organizing an intimate ceremony at Laguna Gloria, overlooking Lady Bird Lake, with a reception for 60 close friends and colleagues in the museum's sculpture garden. Everything about our wedding planning process felt authentic and joyful, from selecting locally sourced flowers to choosing a menu that featured our favorite foods, rather than expensive options designed to impress relatives. The distance from Denver had provided clarity about how toxic my family relationships had become, and how much emotional energy I had been spending trying to earn approval that would never come. In Austin, I was simply Wayne, a successful accountant with a loving fiancé and a bright future ahead. I did not have to constantly measure my achievements against Jessica's lifestyle or justify my choices to parents who had already decided I was less important than my sister and her children. My new colleagues knew nothing about family drama or sibling favoritism. They judged me based on my work performance, professional demeanor, and contributions to team projects. Within 3 months of joining the firm, I had been promoted to senior associate and assigned to high-profile client accounts that challenged my skills and expanded my expertise. The recognition felt genuine and earned, unlike the conditional approval I had spent years trying to achieve from my family. Sarah thrived in Austin's vibrant culture, making friends through her work and exploring the city's music scene, food trucks, and outdoor activities. We hiked together on weekends at Zilker Park and Barton Creek Greenbelt, attended concerts at Stubbs Bar BQ and the Continental Club, and discovered new restaurants in neighborhoods like South Lamar and East Austin. Our social circle expanded to include couples from various backgrounds who valued authenticity and mutual support, rather than competition and judgment. The transformation in our relationship was remarkable once we were free from the stress and expectations that had surrounded us in Denver. without the constant undercurrent of family disapproval and favoritism affecting our interactions. Sarah and I discovered new depths of compatibility and shared dreams for our future. We talked openly about children career goals, travel aspirations, and the kind of family culture we wanted to create together based on equality, respect, and genuine affection. But our peaceful new existence was shattered one afternoon in March when my cousin Daniel made an unexpected visit to Austin for business meetings with his consulting company. Daniel had always been one of my favorite relatives, someone who stayed out of family politics and maintained relationships with everyone, regardless of drama or disagreements. His visit was supposed to be a pleasant reunion and an opportunity for him to meet Sarah and see our new home. Over dinner at Franklin Barbecue, Daniel's conversation took an uncomfortable turn that revealed disturbing information about what had been happening in Denver since my departure. He seemed hesitant to bring up family matters, but eventually explained that he felt I needed to know what was being said about me in my absence. The news he shared was more devastating than anything I could have imagined. According to Daniel, my parents had been systematically contacting every member of our extended family over the past 6 months, providing their version of events surrounding my departure from Denver. They had portrayed me as mentally unstable, emotionally abusive toward Jessica, and completely ungrateful for everything they had provided during my childhood and young adult years. They claimed I had developed psychological problems that made me paranoid about imaginary favoritism and jealous of Jessica's natural success in building a family. My mother had told relatives that I had suffered some kind of emotional breakdown that caused me to make accusations against the family that had no basis in reality. She explained that I had become obsessed with money and financial records, creating elaborate conspiracy theories about family gift-giving that demonstrated my need for professional mental health intervention. She suggested that my sudden engagement and job transfer were desperate attempts to escape accountability for my inappropriate behavior toward family members who had always supported and loved me. Even more shocking was Daniel's revelation that my parents had actually contacted my former employer in Denver, attempting to provide negative references that could have damaged my career prospects in Austin. They had spoken with human resources personnel and my former supervisor, claiming that I had exhibited erratic behavior during my final months in Colorado, and suggesting that my new employer should be aware of potential performance and reliability issues. The most painful disclosure came when Daniel explained that Jessica had been actively working to garner sympathy and support from our church community and neighborhood social circles. She had posted on social media about having an emotionally abusive brother who had abandoned the family during a difficult time without providing context about the financial arrangements or family dynamics that had led to my decision to relocate. Her posts had generated an outpouring of emotional and financial support from friends and acquaintances who believed she was being victimized by a cruel and selfish sibling. Church members had organized meal trains and babysitting schedules to help Jessica cope with what they believed was the traumatic loss of her brother's support. Neighborhood friends had contributed to an emergency fund to help her family manage expenses that they assumed I had previously been covering. Jessica's social media presence had become a carefully curated narrative of single-handed motherhood and family sacrifice that completely omitted any mention of our parents' extensive financial support or Brad's contributions to the household. Daniel also revealed that extended family members were confused and concerned about the conflicting information they were receiving. Some relatives remembered my responsible and hard-working nature from childhood and were skeptical about my parents' claims of mental instability and selfishness. Others, particularly those who were closer to Jessica or had witnessed her charming personality at family gatherings, were more inclined to believe that I had become jealous and resentful of her happiness and success. The character assassination campaign had been more thorough and vindictive than I could have imagined. My parents were not simply disappointed about my decision to establish independence. They were actively working to destroy my reputation and relationships within the extended family network. They seemed determined to ensure that I could never return to Denver with my credibility intact, effectively burning bridges on my behalf to prevent any possibility of reconciliation on terms that did not involve complete surrender to their version of family hierarchy. As Daniel finished explaining everything he had witnessed and heard over the past several months, I felt a mixture of anger, sadness, and relief. The anger came from understanding how far my family was willing to go to punish me for refusing to accept their preferential treatment of Jessica. The sadness came from realizing that the parents I had loved and respected throughout my childhood were capable of such deliberate cruelty towards their own son. But the relief came from knowing that my decision to leave Denver and build an independent life had been absolutely correct, and that staying in Colorado would have subjected Sarah and me to even more manipulation and emotional abuse. That evening, as Sarah and I processed Daniel's revelations together, we both understood that my family's behavior had validated every concern I had expressed about their treatment and priorities. We also realized that our new life in Austin was not just an escape from family drama, but a foundation for the kind of authentic, respectful relationships we wanted to build with people who valued integrity and mutual support. The contrast between our healthy, growing social circle in Austin and the toxic dynamics I had left behind in Denver could not have been clearer. 8 months after I had walked away from Jessica's birthday dinner, my phone rang on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing quarterly tax reports for one of my largest clients. The caller ID showed my father's number, which I had not seen on my phone since the night I announced my engagement and relocation plans. For a moment, I considered letting the call go to voicemail, but something about receiving contact after such a long silence made me answer. "Wayne." My father's voice sounded strained and exhausted in a way I had never heard before. "We need to talk. Something terrible has happened." The desperation in his tone was immediately apparent, cutting through months of silence and anger with what sounded like genuine crisis and fear. He explained that Jessica's husband, Brad, had disappeared 3 days earlier, leaving behind a trail of financial destruction that was only beginning to be understood by the family. Brad had not simply left his wife and 4 young children. He had systematically destroyed their financial security through gambling debts, fraudulent loans, and illegal use of family assets that Jessica had known nothing about until creditors began calling her directly. The scope of Brad's deception was staggering and went far beyond anything the family had imagined possible. He had accumulated over $300,000 in gambling debts at casinos in Colorado and Nevada, using credit cards, personal loans, and cash advances that he had somehow managed to obtain without Jessica's knowledge or consent. But even more devastating was his decision to secretly mortgage Jessica's house, the same house our parents had helped them purchase with a substantial down payment using the equity as collateral for additional gambling funds. Brad had also emptied every savings account the couple shared, including college funds, that had been established for their 4 children with contributions from our parents and other relatives over the years. The children's education money, which had grown to nearly $60,000 through careful investment and regular contributions, had been withdrawn and lost at gambling tables in Las Vegas during Brad's increasingly desperate attempts to win back money he had already lost. Even more shocking was the revelation that Brad had been forging Jessica's signature on loan documents and credit card applications for months, using her excellent credit rating to obtain additional funds that he immediately gambled away. When Jessica finally discovered the extent of his activities, she found herself legally responsible for debts she had never known existed, including joint obligations that made her liable for hundreds of thousands of dollars in fraudulent transactions. The crisis had escalated beyond just financial problems when Brad's creditors began threatening legal action against Jessica for debt recovery. Some of the people he owed money to were not traditional lenders or casinos, but private individuals who had loaned him cash based on his promises to repay quickly with interest. These creditors were now demanding payment from Jessica, directly threatening consequences that went beyond legal action and included personal safety concerns for her and the children. My father's voice cracked with emotion as he described how Jessica had discovered Brad's disappearance and financial crimes. She had returned home from a routine grocery shopping trip to find their house empty, except for the children who were confused about where their father had gone. Brad had left no note, no explanation, and no forwarding contact information. He had simply vanished, leaving behind a family facing foreclosure, bankruptcy, and potential physical danger from creditors who did not care about Jessica's innocence in his schemes. The stress of these discoveries had triggered a minor heart attack for my mother, who was currently hospitalized for cardiac monitoring and stress management. The doctors were optimistic about her recovery, but her condition had been complicated by severe anxiety about Jessica's situation and guilt about their inability to protect their daughter from such devastating betrayal. My father was trying to manage his wife's medical care while simultaneously dealing with Jessica's legal and financial crisis. Jessica herself had been hospitalized for severe anxiety and depression after learning the full extent of her husband's betrayal and the impossible financial situation he had left her to handle alone. She was unable to work because of her emotional state and her need to care for 4 young children who were confused and frightened by their father's sudden absence and the strange adults who kept calling their mother about money. But the most shocking revelation came when my father explained that our parents' own financial situation had been compromised by their years of supporting Jessica's lifestyle. They had already extended themselves significantly through the various gifts, loans, and subsidies they had provided over the past several years. Their retirement savings had been substantially depleted. Their own house had been refinanced to provide cash for Jessica's expenses, and they were now facing the possibility of their own bankruptcy if they continued trying to support her through this crisis. Wayne, I know we have not spoken since that night at Jessica's birthday party. My father continued, his pride clearly struggling with his desperation. I know you are angry about things that happened before you moved to Austin, but Jessica needs help that we cannot provide, and you are the only family member with the financial resources and professional expertise to guide us through this situation. He went on to explain that they had consulted with bankruptcy attorneys and financial advisors, but the costs of professional help were beyond their current means, and the complexity of Brad's fraudulent activities required expertise in forensic accounting and debt negotiation that was outside their understanding. They needed someone who could analyze the financial records, negotiate with creditors, and develop a plan for protecting Jessica and the children from the worst consequences of Brad's actions. The assumption underlying my father's call was clear, despite everything that had happened between us. Despite the months of silence and the character assassination campaign Daniel had described, they expected me to immediately abandon my new life in Austin and return to Denver to rescue the family that had treated me as a second-class member for my entire adult life. They believed that blood ties and family obligations would override my personal boundaries and the boundaries I had established to protect my own mental health and future happiness. As my father continued talking, explaining the various legal deadlines and financial pressures that were mounting daily, I found myself listening with a mixture of genuine concern for Jessica's children and amazement at my family's assumption that I would automatically provide the help they needed. They had spent months telling everyone who would listen that I was mentally unstable, emotionally abusive, and completely selfish, yet they still expected me to drop everything and solve their problems when their own resources proved inadequate. The conversation lasted nearly an hour, with my father providing increasingly detailed information about Brad's debts, the legal proceedings that had been initiated, and the various deadlines that were approaching for responses to creditors and court documents. Throughout his explanation, he repeatedly emphasized that time was running out and that immediate action was required to prevent even worse consequences for Jessica and her children. When he finally finished laying out the full scope of the crisis, my father asked the question that I had been expecting since the phone call began. "Will you come home and help us figure out what to do?" The word home struck me as particularly ironic, given that I had been told in no uncertain terms that Austin was now my home, and that I was no longer welcome at family gatherings or events in Denver. I told my father that I needed time to process what he had shared and to discuss the situation with Sarah before making any decisions about how or whether to get involved. He pressed for an immediate commitment, explaining that every day of delay made Jessica's situation worse and increased the likelihood that she would lose her house and face even more serious legal consequences. But I held firm on my need for time to consider my options and responsibilities. After ending the call, I sat in my office for a long time, staring out the window at the Austin skyline and trying to comprehend how dramatically the family dynamics had shifted in just a few months. The people who had dismissed my achievements, minimized my relationships, and systematically favored my sister in every aspect of family life were now desperately needing my expertise, resources, and help. The irony was overwhelming, but so was the genuine concern I felt for Jessica's children, who were innocent victims of their father's choices and their grandparents' financial overextension. That evening, Sarah and I talked for hours about the phone call and what it meant for our life together. We both understood that this crisis would test every boundary I had established and every principle that had guided my decision to relocate to Austin. The question was not whether Jessica needed help, but whether I was willing to provide that help under circumstances that could easily recreate all the toxic dynamics I had worked so hard to escape. After 3 days of careful consideration and long conversations with Sarah about the potential consequences of getting involved, I decided that I could not ignore the crisis facing Jessica's children, regardless of how their mother and grandparents had treated me over the years. However, I was determined that any assistance I provided would be on my terms with clear boundaries and conditions that addressed the fundamental problems in our family dynamics, rather than simply providing a temporary financial bailout. Sarah and I flew to Denver the following weekend, staying at a hotel near the airport, rather than with family members to assess the situation firsthand and determine what kind of help, if any, would be both appropriate and effective. Before meeting with anyone, I spent hours reviewing financial documents that my father had emailed, analyzing Brad's debt structure, and the legal options available to Jessica for protecting herself and her children from his fraudulent activities. The financial situation was even worse than my father had initially described. Brad had not only accumulated massive gambling debts and mortgaged the family home without Jessica's knowledge, but he had also opened numerous credit accounts using Jessica's personal information, effectively destroying her credit rating and making her legally responsible for debts that could take decades to repay, even under the most optimistic scenarios. When I finally met with my parents and Jessica at the law office of their bankruptcy attorney, the contrast between their current desperation and their previous attitude toward my worth as a family member was stark and uncomfortable. My mother, still pale and shaky from her recent hospitalization, greeted me with tears and apologies for the estrangement that had developed between us. My father appeared humbled and grateful that I had taken time away from my new life to help with their crisis. Jessica's condition was heartbreaking to witness. She had lost significant weight due to stress and appeared exhausted from caring for 4 young children while dealing with constant phone calls from creditors and attorneys. Her usual confidence and charm had been replaced by anxiety and fear about losing everything she had believed was secure in her life. For the first time in our relationship, she looked at me not as a less important sibling, but as someone whose expertise and resources could potentially save her family from complete disaster. However, I was not prepared to simply step into my old role as the responsible family member who solved problems while receiving no recognition or appreciation for his sacrifices. Instead, I presented my family with a formal written agreement outlining the conditions under which I would provide assistance, making it clear that my help was contingent on fundamental changes in how our family operated and how they treated all family members going forward. My proposed agreement included several non-negotiable requirements. First, my parents would need to publicly acknowledge in writing and in conversations with extended family members that they had provided Jessica with preferential financial treatment throughout her adult life, and that their claims about my mental instability and selfishness had been false and vindictive. They would need to contact every relative they had spoken with about me and correct the record about my character and reasons for relocating to Austin. Second, Jessica would need to enter both financial counseling and family therapy to address the dependency issues that had contributed to her vulnerability to Brad's deception and to develop the skills necessary for genuine financial independence. She would also need to issue public corrections to her social media posts about having an abusive brother, explaining that her previous statements had been inaccurate and unfair. Third, my parents would need to demonstrate their commitment to equal treatment of their children by liquidating their own assets, including their retirement savings and their plan to purchase a vacation home in Aspen to contribute to Jessica's crisis resolution before expecting any assistance from me. They needed to experience the same financial sacrifice that they had always expected from me while providing unlimited support to Jessica. Fourth, any financial assistance I provided would be structured as loans with clear repayment terms and legal documentation rather than gifts that would perpetuate the cycle of dependence and entitlement that had characterized Jessica's adult life. I would also require transparency and regular financial reporting to ensure that any money I contributed was being used appropriately and effectively. Finally, I insisted that all future family gatherings and communications would operate under principles of equality and mutual respect, with no assumptions about my availability for emergency assistance or crisis management based on my professional skills or financial stability. My relationship with the family would be voluntary and conditional on their ability to treat me with the same consideration they provided to Jessica and her children. The reaction to my proposed agreement was immediate and revealing. My mother became upset and accused me of taking advantage of their desperation to force changes that were unnecessary and hurtful. She argued that family members should help each other without conditions or legal contracts, and that my demands proved I had indeed become selfish and vindictive, as they had claimed to relatives. My father initially appeared more willing to consider my terms, but ultimately objected to the requirement that they publicly acknowledge their preferential treatment of Jessica and correct their statements about my character to extended family members. He suggested that admitting fault would be embarrassing and unnecessary, and that we could simply move forward with a fresh start without dwelling on past mistakes or misunderstandings. Jessica's response was the most disappointing of all. While she was desperate for my help with her immediate financial crisis, she was unwilling to accept responsibility for the social media posts that had damaged my reputation, or to acknowledge that her lifelong financial dependence on our parents had contributed to her current vulnerability. She argued that she had been the victim of her husband's deception and should not be required to make changes or admissions that would add to her emotional burden during an already difficult time. The family's refusal to accept accountability while still demanding my assistance created an impossible situation that forced me to make the most difficult decision of my adult life. They wanted me to provide the same unconditional support that I had offered throughout my childhood and young adult years while maintaining the same family dynamics that had driven me to relocate to Austin in the first place. After spending the weekend witnessing their continued inability to recognize or address the fundamental problems in their treatment of family members, I realized that rescuing them from this crisis, without requiring genuine change, would simply enable the same patterns of favoritism, entitlement, and emotional manipulation that had damaged our relationships for years. Providing financial assistance under these circumstances would not only fail to solve the underlying problems, but would also validate their assumption that I could be taken for granted whenever they needed help, while being dismissed and devalued when they did not. On Sunday evening, before flying back to Austin, I met with each family member individually to explain my final decision about their request for assistance. I told them that while I genuinely cared about Jessica's children and wanted to help them avoid the worst consequences of their father's actions, I could not provide the kind of unconditional bailout they were expecting without the assurance that our family relationships would operate differently going forward. I offered a modified version of assistance that did not require their agreement to my original conditions, but also did not enable their continued dysfunction. I would establish a trust fund for Jessica's children that would provide for their education and healthcare needs, bypassing their mother and grandparents entirely to ensure the money was used appropriately. I would also provide Jessica with the names of free legal aid services and financial counseling resources that could help her navigate the bankruptcy process and debt negotiation without requiring ongoing support from family members. However, I made it clear that I would not be providing direct financial assistance to Jessica or my parents, and that I would not be available for future crisis management or emergency support, unless they were willing to address the underlying issues that had created the current situation and damaged our relationships over the years. I also informed them that my decision to maintain distance from the family would continue indefinitely, and that they should not expect me to change my mind if they faced additional problems in the future. The conversation ended with tears, anger, and accusations that I was abandoning the family during their darkest hour. But I left Denver knowing that I had offered appropriate help for the innocent victims of the crisis, while maintaining the boundaries that were necessary for my own emotional health and the security of my marriage to Sarah. 3 months after my return from Denver, I received an unexpected phone call from my father that marked the beginning of a transformation I had never thought possible in our family relationships. His voice was different this time, lacking the desperation that had characterized our previous conversation, but carrying a tone of humility and reflection that I had never heard from him before. "Wayne," he began carefully, "I am calling to tell you something that I should have said months ago, and frankly something I should have realized years ago." He went on to explain that the crisis with Jessica had forced him and my mother to examine their own role in creating the family dynamics that had led to both my departure and Jessica's current struggles. The turning point had come when Jessica's bankruptcy attorney had asked pointed questions about her employment history, financial skills, and ability to manage money independently. During these conversations, it became clear that Jessica had never developed basic life skills because she had always been able to rely on our parents to solve her problems and provide financial support whenever she encountered difficulties. My parents had been forced to liquidate their retirement savings, refinance their home, and even sell my mother's jewelry collection to help Jessica avoid the worst consequences of Brad's gambling debts. For the first time in their lives, they were experiencing the kind of financial stress and uncertainty that most people face when dealing with major crises, because they could no longer simply write checks to make problems disappear. The experience had been humbling and educational in ways they had not anticipated. They began to understand that their unlimited financial support had actually harmed Jessica by preventing her from developing resilience, independence, and problem-solving skills. They also began to recognize that their dismissive treatment of my achievements and independence had been not only unfair, but also a serious mistake in judgment about what constituted success and responsibility. My father explained that he and my mother had spent considerable time talking with Jessica's therapist about family dynamics and the role that parental favoritism can play in creating dysfunction for all children involved, not just the ones who receive less attention. They had learned that their preferential treatment of Jessica had hurt both their children in different ways, creating entitlement and vulnerability in Jessica, while creating resentment and disconnection in me. But the most significant change came when Jessica herself began to take responsibility for her situation and her relationship with me. After several months of counseling and the sobering experience of learning to manage her own finances with limited resources, she had developed a new perspective on her family relationships and her own behavior over the years. Jessica called me directly one evening in late spring, speaking with a maturity and self-awareness that I had never heard from her before. She apologized not only for the social media posts that had damaged my reputation, but also for taking our parents' support for granted while simultaneously taking my reliability and helpfulness for granted. She acknowledged that she had never properly appreciated the sacrifices I had made to maintain family relationships, or the effort I had put into being a responsible and supportive brother. Most importantly, she recognized that her financial dependence on our parents had made her vulnerable to Brad's deception because she had never learned to monitor finances, ask critical questions about money management, or develop the skills necessary for protecting herself and her children from financial abuse. She thanked me for establishing the education trust fund for her children, and acknowledged that my approach to helping them directly, rather than enabling her continued dependence, had been wise and protective. Over the following months, our family relationships began to rebuild on a foundation of mutual respect and equality that had never existed before. My parents made genuine efforts to treat Jessica and me with equal consideration, including asking for my input on family decisions and respecting my boundaries about involvement in crisis management. They also took responsibility for repairing my reputation with extended family members having honest conversations about their previous statements and acknowledging that their characterizations of my behavior had been unfair and inaccurate. Jessica successfully completed her financial counseling program and found employment with a nonprofit organization that provided services to families affected by domestic financial abuse. Her work gave her both income and purpose, while also allowing her to help other women who were facing similar challenges to the ones she had experienced. She developed budgeting skills, learned to live within her means, and began contributing to her children's trust fund rather than simply depending on others to provide for their future. The most meaningful change came in how our family celebrated achievements and supported each other during challenges. When Sarah and I announced that we were expecting our first child, my parents' response was as enthusiastic and supportive as any they had ever shown for Jessica's pregnancies. They offered to contribute equally to our child's education fund and expressed genuine excitement about becoming grandparents to another grandchild who would be loved and valued without favoritism. Our wedding celebration in Austin became a true family reunion, with my parents and Jessica making the trip to Texas to participate in our ceremony and meet our friends and colleagues. The contrast between this celebration and previous family gatherings was remarkable. Instead of everything revolving around Jessica's needs and preferences, the focus was appropriately on Sarah and me, as the couple being honored. My parents contributed financially to the wedding expenses and treated Sarah with the same warmth and acceptance they had always shown to Brad, even during the early stages of Jessica's relationship with him. Perhaps most importantly, Jessica's children were thriving under their new circumstances. With the security provided by their education trust fund and their mother's increased emotional stability, they were adjusting well to their father's absence and building stronger relationships with extended family members who were no longer focused primarily on providing financial support. Jessica's parenting had improved significantly as she learned to set boundaries and teach her children about responsibility and independence, rather than assuming that their needs would always be met by others. The resolution of our family crisis had created the kind of relationships I had always hoped for, but never believed possible. My parents learned to value both their children's different strengths and contributions, rather than showing favoritism based on dependency and frequent crisis. Jessica developed genuine independence and self-respect that made her a stronger mother and a more reliable family member. And I learned that it was possible to maintain family connections while protecting my own boundaries and priorities. 2 years later, when Sarah and I welcomed our daughter Emma into the world, the family celebration was everything I had dreamed of during those difficult months when I thought our relationships might never recover. My parents treated their new granddaughter with the same excitement and generosity they had always shown Jessica's children, and Jessica was genuinely thrilled to have a niece who would grow up knowing both her aunt and uncle as loving, involved family members. The trust fund I had established for Jessica's children had grown substantially through careful investment and regular contributions from multiple family members, ensuring that they would have educational opportunities regardless of any future financial challenges their mother might face. Jessica had also established a smaller but growing education fund for Emma, demonstrating her commitment to treating her brother's child with the same consideration she hoped her children would receive. Most importantly, our family had learned to navigate disagreements and challenges without resorting to favoritism manipulation or emotional blackmail. When conflicts arose, we addressed them directly and honestly, with respect for each person's boundaries and autonomy. Family gatherings became genuinely enjoyable experiences rather than opportunities for drama or competition for attention and resources. Looking back on the journey from that devastating birthday dinner confrontation to our current healthy family relationships, I am grateful for the courage I found to establish boundaries and demand equal treatment. The crisis that could have destroyed our family permanently instead became the catalyst for positive changes that benefited everyone involved, including Jessica's children, who deserved better from all the adults in their lives. The experience taught me that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for family members is to refuse to enable their dysfunction, even when that refusal creates temporary pain and conflict. By maintaining my boundaries and requiring accountability before providing assistance, I helped create the conditions that allowed my parents and Jessica to develop healthier patterns of relating to each other and to me. Our family story demonstrates that it is possible to rebuild damaged relationships when all parties are willing to acknowledge their mistakes, change their behavior, and commit to treating each other with genuine respect and equality. The key was my willingness to put my own well-being first, which ultimately benefited everyone by forcing the kinds of changes that created space for authentic love and mutual support to flourish. Today, Sarah and I continue to build our life together in Austin, surrounded by friends who value us for who we are, rather than what we can provide, while also maintaining meaningful connections with family members who have learned to appreciate and respect our choices. Emma is growing up knowing that she is loved unconditionally by grandparents and an aunt who understand that favoritism and manipulation have no place in healthy family relationships. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where you had to choose between keeping family peace and standing up for what was right? What did you learn about the importance of setting boundaries with people you love? I would love to hear your thoughts and experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more content about navigating difficult family relationships while maintaining your own integrity and happiness. Share this story with someone who might need encouragement to put their own well-being first, even when it means making difficult decisions about family dynamics. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it helps you remember that you deserve to be treated with respect and equality in all your relationships, especially with the people who claim to love you most.